Welcome to Hispanic Biz, Stories of Success. I'm Homero Galicia. In this program, we interview business owners who built successful businesses to learn from them, their story, the story of their struggles and their victories, their triumphs, in the expectation that you find these stories interesting and perhaps inspirational, especially today. You will be inspired and interested today. We have a very special guest, a gentleman who I've known for a few years, who's built a very, very important company in El Paso, an engineer, Mr. Hector Holguin. Thank you, Mr. Holguin, for your time.
Thank you, Homero.
Thank you. Mr. Holguin is an El Paso boy, and you were born in El Paso and went to schools in El Paso, right?
Well, I like to think I have one foot in Juarez because both my parents were born in Chihuahua, and with the revolution, some of them actually moved to Juarez. So I grew up with grandparents and uncles and cousins in Juarez, but we actually moved to El Paso, and I went to grammar school and high school here in El Paso.
And you went to El Paso High.
Correct, right.
And after El Paso High, where did you go to school?
Well, I went to, at that time it was, went from College of Mines to Texas Western to, of course, University of Texas, El Paso. So I went ahead and got my Bachelor of Science degree in Civil Engineering from UTEP, and then I went on and got a Master's degree in Structural Engineering from the University of Texas at Austin. That was in 1959. Okay.
Your family, how many brothers and sisters?
I have one brother, Ricardo, and I have a sister. He couldn't say BB. I mean, he couldn't say baby when she was born, so she's been BB ever since. So Ana Maria BB Holguin is my sister.
What did you learn from your father?
Well, I'm blessed because I had a wonderful father. His greatest treasure was not that he made money. You know, he was an automobile salesman all his life, all his professional life. He started with Lone Star Motor Company, and at that time he could only sell used cars. They wouldn't have a Mexican or Mexican American selling new cars. So he started selling, and I'm talking about the 40s, And so he went up through Lone Star. Then they moved to downtown, which was Watkins, which eventually was bought by Rudolph Chevrolet. And Mr. Neeson, of course, started Rudolph Chevrolet, and of course his son now is taking it over. So my father had a 50-year career in automobile sales. But I like to say he was totally honest. He was. I could go there. My mother would take us there because he worked so many long hours, and people would wait for him for hours. I'm talking about the ranchers from the lower valley, the upper valley, would wait to buy the next car from him because they trusted him. So for generations, you have people even come to me today and say, we bought our first car and every car thereafter from your father. So I'm proud of, he was a very quiet individual, very, I think very dignified, and you could gravitate to his honesty and his sincerity. So I hope that I patterned some of my life after him.
And your mother, what was your mother like?
Well, my mother's Antonia Medina. The Medina family is very well known, and of course they came from Chihuahua, but then in Juarez there's 5 sisters, and my tío Fausto. Fausto Medina started a store. He with the revolution, they lost everything in the city of Chihuahua. He moved to Juarez and started a small little store that eventually became Casa Medina. And he really, the business grew when he decided he could distribute Mexican tile into the U.S. market. Let's say the tile from Monterrey. So every home that was built in the 40s and 50s, in the United States, that Mexican tile probably came from my grandfather's store in Juarez, Wow. So he was the entrepreneur. I guess I get my, a certain style from my father, and then I could see my grandfather being very entrepreneur. He also founded the Red Cross in Juarez, which is where I had my first sort of ties to my wife Rosario, because she was very active in doing, volunteer work for the Red Cross.
Where did you meet your wife?
Well, growing up, I found it was more fun to go to the tardeadas and weddings and festivals in Juarez. There's always something to do, so I would go there with my cousins. And I remember my wife come at her 15-year-old coming out party, but I was a little too old, for her. So, but I just remember seeing her at that time, and it was years later that I actually, made contact again. Okay.
Okay. So you finish Texas Western, or did you graduate from UTEP?
It was Texas Western.
Okay.
Right.
So you graduated around what, 60?
Well, no, I graduated in 1958.
Okay. So now you're a graduate engineer. Did you go to graduate school after that, or did you go to work after?
Well, that's where someone sort of, that's where Miss Destiny comes in. Okay, I wasn't planning on going to graduate school. In fact, I had to go in the military. I served in ROTC, and at that time there was no conflict, so I had to choose between serving 6 months or 2 years. Because I wanted to be a professional engineer, I chose the 6-year path. So my next door neighbor was Dr. Rentelin. He taught metallurgy, a wonderful teacher. And one day he grabbed me and said, where are you going? I mean, well, I need to go in the military. He said, why don't you go to graduate school first? Well, I don't think they'll let me take a leave. No, I'll work on it. So he got me into UT Austin. And thanks to him, I mean, that was a very important passage in my life, because that sort of allowed me to do certain things that I couldn't have done if I didn't have a master's degree.
When did you know you wanted to be an engineer?
Well, I really wanted to be an architect, but there wasn't an architectural school here, and at that time I couldn't really afford to think about going out of town. I had a cousin from Parral that became an architectural engineer, and he went to Austin. So I thought, well, maybe I'd start here in civil engineering and then maybe, get an advanced degree in architecture. And then I have another uncle, in fact, from my father's side, Juan Holguin, that graduated from Texas College of Mines. Now, that's an important, very important historically, because his great uncle was named Juan, and he founded a mine in Tarahumara country with my great grandfather. And my great grandfather died at an early age, so my grandfather decided to name name Juan. So he was going to carry the tradition of the mining, and became a mining engineer. And he founded some of the mines in Mexico, the most famous one being Nica, where you have these wonderful croppings, And make a long story short, he actually, towards the end of his career, he became director of all operations for ASARCO in Mexico.
Wow.
So you can see I had two sides of the family and I love math, so as a way of I think, gravitating to an engineering career.
So it's not foreign to you to think about engineering at all?
No, it was like I say, I think Dr. Rentelin is the one that,
Okay. Okay.
You will do this. Okay, someone sometimes has to tell you that,
So you finish at Austin with your master's, and then what's next?
Well, I served the 6 months in the military. Then once you do that, you have to serve so many years in the reserves. But that's when I knew that El Paso didn't really have much to offer. That even today, a lot of our graduates, engineering graduates, have to leave town. Okay, and so I started exploring, and I went to work at the Douglas Space Systems Center in Huntington Beach, California. And so this is the beginning of the major Saturn program, and Douglas had the second stage. The first stage is a monster, the one that has to, that's so many stories high, and that the payload has to carry the Saturn mission, the Apollo mission, up into orbit. Well, we had the second stage, which is much more interesting, because basically the second stage takes it from once it separates, it goes into to Earth orbit. Okay. Then the engines have to ignite again and go from Earth orbit to the passages to the moon. So that was a much more interesting, the work there. I started working the design section, and I would design a lot of widgets. You know, it wasn't, after a while, it wasn't really that interesting, you know, but from the standpoint that, you know, you look around and you see a big IBM computer hidden in a room, you see engineers working on terminals. I said, well, so I started looking around and a position opened in the test lab. And so I moved over to the test laboratory as an engineer. And the rest of my career at the Space Systems Center was in that test lab.
How long did you work for them?
I was there from 1960-61 to 1966.
Okay, so
5 years.
5 years.
Yeah.
And what year did you get married in?
Well, it took 2 years to court my wife. You know, we sort of dated in Juarez, and then I think the timing wasn't right for us. She moved to Mexico City, and that's when I moved to California, and we didn't see each other for 2 years. So. Again, you know, Miss Destiny knocks, and and we got together, and we got married in '64, and we moved to California. So Huntington Beach is just outside of Long Beach, and we lived in a small little community, just, you know, which was very nice, Belmont Shores. So it was a very nice way to begin a marriage, independent, and wouldn't hesitate to have visitors. People love to go to that part of the country.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. So you worked there 6 years in the missile area, in the testing area. So what's the next step for you?
Well, to me, that's where I learned to use a computer. You know, if I was in the design section, they introduced these terminals, and I would go in there and learn how to program. But you just program very simple programs, you know, on paper tape, and then you run it. And then I had to create some computer models, but what you do with that, you fill out forms, and the forms go to this big room somewhere, and magically, you know, they produce what you want. And the computer at that time was just had to be huge, you know. So my interaction with computers was more intimate with a terminal than it was filling out forms to create a computer model. But moving over to the test lab was more important. Again, I was working on some smaller projects. Then I guess fate caused an accident, and all of a sudden they wanted to replace the engineer, and they asked me if I would step into that role. And this was the largest test program at that time, which is a 2-year test program for the second stage, and it was for the thrust structure, which is where the engines mount. So it's a very complex test, because you had to simulate all of the motions to get from, you know, to get to Earth orbit and then ignite and then go to lunar orbit. So it was a very complex 2-year passage. But if that accident hadn't occurred, you know, I was a young kid on the block, and I remember when knocked on my door and asked me if I'd do it. You know, I could have easily said, "What?" You know, and something told me, no, I thought, you know, yes, I'll do it, you know, and most of us didn't know what we were doing. You know, it was more of a, you had to be practical. You had people that were very well prepared, you know, preparing all the parameters. But as far as getting in there and getting the total project and getting people to work on something that took 2 years to achieve. And remember, there's 400,000 people around the country doing the same thing on this program. It was a massive program.
So you were asked to be the lead engineer of the test lab?
Yeah, so I became the project engineer for this major project.
Wow.
It took 2 years to certify this structure.
So you were selected over people from all these big schools in the country?
Yeah, I think certainly having the master's degree helped me, but there are people that are from MIT and from Stanford and Berkeley and so on. And I guess I learned to be practical, and I learned if someone gave me a job, I just knew that I had to get it done, and people could rely on that. And I think that helped me, you know, get this particular project.
Did you ever have a issue with confidence?
Well, I think I learned early on that, you know, fear can paralyze you, right? I mean, if you're afraid of something, it just paralyzes you. And there's always moments that, especially being an entrepreneur, you know, but I always treat it like a shadow on the wall. I know it's there, I respect it, but I will not let it consume me. I will not let it consume my spirit. So that's very important, because if you accept those kind of challenges, and fear is there, basically the greater the challenge, the greater the opportunity. So you learn that fear is just a mechanism that's going to either work with you or against you.
Wow. So you're lead engineer, and you finished that project. You did the 2-year test, and
yeah, we had a very successful project. They wanted me to stay on, and at that time they were thinking of the Sky Laboratory, and at that time I was married. We had our first daughter in Long Beach, which is Rosario, my oldest daughter. And I said, you know what, it's time for me to go back. If we don't go back now, it's going to be very difficult, because I love this work, and the Skylab thing is going to consume everybody for the next number of years. So I decided it was time to pick up and leave, not knowing that because of the Vietnam War, Lyndon Johnson killed the Skylab project, and where they had 400,000 people working. Like in our facility, we had 4,000 engineers, and designers. And in our lab, there was not that many, but we had, let's say, maybe 36 people. So we had, it was a smaller group. But in the building, the main building, we had 4,000 people. Well, within a stroke of a pen, most of those lost their jobs.
Wow.
And
Wow.
so we lost a tremendous opportunity as a nation, because there's a serious void there that didn't rekindle itself until we went back to finally, we do have a lab working in space, but that should have happened 10 years before.
But you'd already decided to.
Yeah, I decided to leave and come back. I think the main motivation is that I grew up. I'm very Mexican in soul and what I love, and the music, the tapestry, the celebration of the family. And then, I step across the river and I'm very American, because I know what this country offers, and the free enterprise system, it's unequal anywhere. So you might say that you learn to appreciate that. I wanted my daughters to grow up being very Mexican. I wanted them to understand the importance of the tradition and cultures. Well, the only way to do that is to come back here. And yes, for all the first years, them growing up, all their birthdays, all of our entertainment was always in Juarez, and of course relatives here in El Paso.
So you come back to El Paso. How many children did you have?
Well, we came back, and my wife announced to me a few weeks later that we're having our second daughter, Mara Isabel, and I didn't have a job, So here I'd left a wonderful job, and I thought I had plenty of time, to look around, and I was thinking of actually starting something on my own at that time. Also, I have the pressure of saying, whoops, thankfully we had the insurance from my work in aerospace that would cover the expenses and so on. But it did put pressure on me to go ahead and start looking for something that could, provide for the family. So Mara was born on July the 4th. She's been a firecracker ever since. That's and then I have 2 more daughters. Lili Lilia Marcela, we call her Lili, and Ana Elisa. And so I'm blessed with 4 daughters.
Wow, fantastic. So you find a job in El Paso.
Well, again, remember I talk about Miss Destiny, and and I always say she's wicked and wily. I saw Miss Destiny because she knocks on your door when you least expect it. I get a call from a young friend, Bob Whitus, that I'd worked in the summer at a company called Smith and Cremens, and he found out I was in town, and he calls me and said, "Hector, we've got a position here. We'd like for you to consider it." Well, this is a civil engineering firm. I've been in aerospace for 5 years. And I said, I don't see how I can do that. Well, why don't you talk to Mr. Cremens? At that time, he had separated and formed Cremens Incorporated. And he was the largest civil engineering firm in El Paso. There weren't too many. And he had the airport, all the work at the airport, had most of the subdivisions. All of Cielo Vista, there's nothing there. At that time, I'm talking about 1966, 1967. So Cielo Vista was not there. You know, it was all desert, and so you had the airport, and then it was all dirt. Well, to make a long story short, we actually developed all of Cielo Vista. Okay, and we developed Horizon City, and we developed most of the major land developments in that period of. I was with him from 1966 to 1972. That's 6 years. Okay.
So when you say develop, what do you mean?
Well, when he interviewed me, I was honest with him. I said, you know, I did work for you a summer. I do know coordinate geometry, you know, but I don't know, you know. He said, that's all right. You know computers, and I think we've got some projects coming, and you know, I'm intrigued by what we can do with a computer. So that's what started it. I went ahead and at that time it was something being sold at a local architectural, you know, store, a small little computer that you program. But you could program it in chunks, you know, in 2K chunks, you know, 2,000 characters. You know, when you talk about a megabyte, you know, I don't even know what that is even today. I mean, I start with 2K, 8K, 16K, which is 16,000, and 64. I thought that had the world by the hand. So we started with a very small computer, but I learned to program, which I learned to program in aerospace. So I programmed and learned and did, you know, an earthwork package and a coordinate geometry package, and so basically, but I learned a very important lesson. I did it, and I put a lot of fancy whistles and bells on it, you know, and I went out to show my work to the people there, and I thought everybody would gravitate to it. Nobody would use it, you know, nobody would use it. It's the right way you learn a lesson. Keep it simple. The more simpler it is, the more powerful it is. So then you go ahead and develop. Everything I did from then on becomes very compact, very modular, and you design it for people that are afraid of computers. At that time, there's no computers in the workplace, so other than the very huge mainframes. So we learned through that experience that you have to apply it where people that are typically doing it by hand, like draftsmen and designers, can actually make that transition very, very quickly and gain productivity in months and not, or even in weeks. You know.
So you started programming to do the drafting.
Right. Now, because of all of a sudden we had the contract to do Horizon City and Cielo Vista, so we knew that we had to put out thousands of lots in land development every week. I'm not talking about every month. I'm talking about, just to let you know, we were pumping out on an IBM 1130. Which is a mini computer. We're pumping out 6,000 lots a week. Okay, that means you got draftsmen. You know, let's say 12 draftsmen turning out plats every day, but the everything was being designed with a computer. But at that time, the IBM 1130 worked on a card system. God forbid if you dropped the cards, okay, because it's a box of cards, and then you fed it into a machine, and that's how you did your programming, and that's how you process the work. So we had greatly automated the operation because we were pumping out 6,000 lots a week, and we were doing it with, I'd say, probably 12 people, you know, and our competitors didn't even come close to that. And at that time, of course, the only way you could do computer-aided design in civil engineering design, land development, was on a very large mainframe that would cost $250,000 a seat. You know, and here we were talking about getting something down that could be used in a small, you know, medium-sized consulting firm, and which is what we did.
So that's what you did. You.
Well, I became vice president of operations, and in the first year, and then he gave me the ability to manage all of the operations, including the field work. But he had to be pretty understanding, and that this young aerospace brat would come in and try to, you know, change the status quo. One time I'll never forget, I would work on weekends sometimes, you know, and one time I didn't know, I was sprawled on the floor with all the records, you know, all the files, and what I was doing is weeding out the stuff that we couldn't use. I mean, there's a gold mine in all the filing cabinets, but no one could use it because there's so much junk there. So I would take Saturdays, spend a few hours, and take stuff out and throw it away or put it away. He came in and saw me what I was doing, and his eyes, very seldom would his eyes get narrow, you know, and so I knew I was in trouble. He said, well, I better not lose anything that's valuable. So I'm no dummy. Whatever I threw away, I put in my garage for, for a year to make sure that it wasn't needed. So, but I did streamline the whole. What you need to understand that it's people, process, and so it's not just computers. You need to impact the whole, everything that touches the design or the drafting and so on. So the by making the information, the libraries lean and making the ability for engineers to get the information they need, then the past serves the future. This wisdom of the past and projects of the past, we could easily move through that and save very valuable time and getting each new project to fruition.
In essence, what you did was develop a computer-assisted drafting software using little pieces of information, right? Small pieces of data.
Yeah, the basis for civil engineering design, land development is coordinate geometry, And before you used to have a book with, 13 digits, and you'd have to enter all that information just to get sine, cosine, tangent. So by having coordinate geometry, you automate all that. So in that process, basically, we learned to take the IBM 1130, and it's not sufficient just to code it. What we did is create computing modules. Okay, here's what I mean by computing modules, because what we do, if you design one street, the next street is the same, except all you do is tilt it, right, and move it to a new orientation. So you take the same cards and you say, okay, now the control points, instead of being here and here, you shift them, and they're, and you've chipped them to the new orientation. Then what happens? You take lots, right, down the street, and lots are the same size, right? And so you just say, now I want it here and here and here, so you do that. You have a cul-de-sac, what do? Well, you design one cul-de-sac and the lots around it, and you say, I want it here, 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 and here. So that's how we were able to get to those 6,000 lots per week, because we created, which served me in when I started my company, to create computing modules that automate tremendously the very detailed, tedious work that is typical of coordinate geometry, but it's typical of any design and drafting operation.
You were just solving a problem that you saw.
Right, I saw, and I guess I learned early on that, you got to break the status quo, which is very difficult to do. You look around and everybody, every walk of life is chained to the status quo. So somehow you got to look at it and say, how can I make that better? I learned a wonderful lesson from a Russian that came into town. And he came to see me one time to see if he could do something for me. And he told me a story. He said, I came to El Paso, I didn't have any money. And I walked around and I walked into this business school. And he said, I'd like to teach math and drafting and so on. And I said, well, we really don't have a position. But I'll tell you what, if you can get 10 students to take drafting, we'll set up a drafting course. So he went ahead and set up a drafting course. But here's what he did, which is unusual. He would take those students and he said, we're going to invent something, So let's start. Let's invent a better ruler. A ruler, a wooden ruler. So what does he do? He takes them to the library to research where rulers came from, okay? So he takes that and teaches, what's he doing? He's teaching them how to do research. Then he wants them to write a paper. He's teaching them how to do technical writing. They haven't even drawn anything yet. You see what I'm saying? So he's taking them through this innovative process, and he's going to come up with a better ruler, So to me, basically that's the core of innovation, that you have to look at something and make it better and break it down into its component parts, research it, and move it on up.
You had mentioned an influence that you had meeting a Russian who had came. You had been developing this modular way of doing engineering drafting, and you were telling us about this this Russian that inspired you. He had a method.
Okay.
You mind sharing that?
Well, I always admire the Russians are wonderful mathematicians and scientists, and this Russian I'll have to remember his name, but I'll get it to you. But anyway, he came to El Paso, didn't have any money, and he approached me and see if he could do something with us, and we did provide a small contract. But he said, he went around looking for a job, and he walked into this business school, and said, I can teach math, I can teach drafting, I can, went on and on. Well, the owner was intrigued with drafting and said, well, if you can get 10 students, we'll go ahead and set up the class. Well, within a year, he had, more like 25 students. But what he did, he would, and I told him how important it is to break the status quo. He started a course and he'd say, we're going to invent, let's say, for example, a ruler, okay? Just a simple wooden ruler. Here's a ruler, and we're going to invent a new ruler. But what he did immediately, he took them to the library to research where the ruler came from or things like that. So he would teach them research. Then they had to do a paper on what they found. So he taught them technical writing along with the research. They hadn't even put a pen to paper yet. Then they started drawing, okay? And he had them work in teams of 4 or 5 people, which is ideal. I learned that in the military. In program, it's better to have compact teams of 4 to 6 people. So that was his course. He would teach them all the basics of not just the drawing, but the elements of research, technical writing, design, and then taking the project to completion. Well, without knowing it, that's basically what we do. When we break the status quo, you take young people and you teach them the tools. But then what I like to do is, we always hired people that had already put in about 2 years at UTEP or 2 years at New Mexico State or the Juárez Autónoma la Universidad Autónoma de Juárez, etc. And we would immediately assign them a project that was impossible, and give 90 days to do it. And then work with a team with a mature manager. They always got it done. Why? Because they weren't locked into the status quo. If I gave it to a mature team, they'd take 6 months to a year, So we learned that early on, that you need to constantly bring into a company that spirit of youthfulness. And then what happens, the old guard learns to do the same thing. In high tech, because we survived in high tech for 25 years, the only way you do that is to break the status quo each and every year and innovate and always make things better on a consistent basis. Okay.
Well, here you are working at this engineering firm, Crimmins,
Right.
designing, plotting the development of Cielo Vista and Horizon City. And with your program now, you're able to churn out drawings very quickly because now you've made it computerized.
Right.
In a sense. So you stayed doing this until when?
Well, I worked at Crimmins Incorporated for, till 1972, and even though I was vice president of operations, I owned 20% of the business. He was kind enough to say, okay, and so at that time I owned 20% of the business. But without getting into detail, I felt it was time to move on and start my own company. So I did leave in 1972, and looked around. I knew I could do some consulting work. I couldn't compete with Crimmins, but we could do that. Pounded the streets to see what we could do. Computers were still, a novelty, and we couldn't do much there. I ended up doing all the data processing for Union Fashion, which was a clothing store, but they had a chain of 7 stores. Very demanding. The stores were downtown and one on the west side, but it was a very demanding accounting system. So we learned to work in that environment, and we had a very tough-minded person running the accounting and the operations, but it was delightful to work for. But anyway, we learned to work, and then trying to come up with a computer that would do that. I was walking near Southwest Title, Hughes Butterworth, who you know, and I walked in and met Hughes for the first time. He said, I don't have any work for you, but I've got a IBM System 3 back there. If you want to use it on a second shift, I won't charge you until you start bringing in, money on it. So we start working on a second shift on an IBM System 3, and that's how we did the work for Union Fashion, along with the computer work. Okay, so we did that for a while, and then I was still interested. I couldn't afford an IBM 1130, and so I looked around for what was available at the time. And I remember that some salesman walked in with a Wang little desktop, a programmable calculator, you know. And I was amazed at the speed, not realizing that it was a core memory. It's the same core memory that you found on the mainframes of that period. Dr. Wang was the inventor of the core memory. And if I fast forward with his career, he's the one that invented the word processor and office automation. He built a major, you know, billion-dollar company outside of Boston and Tewksbury. And then, but anyway, we took this little programmable calculator and it started putting in the same kind of coordinate geometry and the ability to do the design work. Except you have to toggle, you know. It was a beast to work with, but we got it to work, and it was absolutely super fast. So that started when I looked at that and I said, my gosh, we put our whole civil engineering library on here. This is very marketable because this unit is $10,000, you know, and people are doing that. Well, you know, on an IBM 1130, you paid, you know, 100 times that, and the mainframes, of course, would cost you $250,000 per station, you know. So I talked to some people at Wang Laboratories, and they said, well, we will go ahead and look at what you have. And I said, well, I'll come up, but I need to make sure that you guarantee that I'll talk to the director of marketing or the director of sales, you know, because I learned the hard way. If you don't get to the decision maker, you're just not going to get anywhere. So I did I got an agreement that Roland Bouvier, who was their director of marketing, was going to see me. Well, we arrived, I arrived ready to showcase what we had done. And Roland Bouvier wasn't there, just his staff, you know, 4 people. And right away I knew that I wouldn't get anywhere. You know, the more I talked, the worse it got. So I just waited, and I said, is Mr. Bouvier coming? He said, oh yeah, he made a commitment, he's going to come. Well, I knew when he walked down that room, I better be quick, you know, and get to the point. And so I knew that I had to have him at the first 10 minutes. You know, the elevator ride, you know, I had to get him in the first 10 minutes. Well, he looked at me and we eyeballed each other. You know, you eyeball people to make sure that, you know, can you trust them? Are they, you know, and he said, well, I'll tell you what, and he walked out of the room with his people, and I said, well, I know his people are against it. He came back and said, we're going to set up a test market for you in Dallas, okay? So we'll use our Wang office there, and we'll bring in some engineering firms that they can look at this, and that's what we'll do. So I went back to El Paso. It was destiny again. There's a surveyors convention, civil engineering convention in Houston before we were targeted to go to Dallas. Thankfully, we went to Houston. We would have bombed in Dallas, okay? Houston was a very dynamic city, you know. Dallas is more conservative, and where Houston people are, you know, are risk takers. They just, it's just, I don't know what it is. I guess because of the nature of the petroleum industry and all that. So we wound up in this surveyors convention, and there was a young salesman for Wang, Russ Kaufman. They call him the 3-stop kid because he made his quota by calling him, you know, NASA and 2 other large accounts, and then he would, you know, take a break the rest of the year. He was very, very bright. He was intrigued by what we were doing with the Wang, so he stayed with us, thankfully, because he really, you know, I didn't know how to sell, you know. I could barely speak, you know, more than a paragraph at a time, you know, without, you know, where he was just gifted in selling. Well, we sold 7 systems, not then, but follow-up. I got ahead of myself. We were leaving the Surveyors show, which was a small show, and we were packing in the room, and my wife was with us because, you know, she would, when we stayed over a period of time, if she could break away, leave with the daughters with family, she joined me in Houston. She was looking at a newspaper, you know, just taking up time, and noticed that there's a national convention of civil engineers coming to Houston just a couple of weeks later. And I said, wow, you know, and I'm a member of the American Society of Civil Engineers, so I called up and said, can we stay and present at your convention? He said, well, we don't allow exhibits. You know, at that time they didn't allow exhibits at these major civil engineering conventions. I said, well, I'm not going to give them a sales job. I'm just going to show them what we have and let them just see you know, when somebody's interested, we can contact them later. So they allowed us to do that. And that's where Ross Kupman worked with us, and we sold 7 systems from that convention.
So what was it you were showing the engineers?
Well, we were showing a complete, on that little Wang unit, we were showing a complete civil engineer design package. They could do all their land development, they could do all the road work design, they could do all the earthwork, they could calculate all the lots, all the coordinate geometry. So it was a full-scale engineering program that before I was doing that on an IBM 1130, you know.
So has there been an engineering program designed for computers, the small frame computers, before?
No, in fact, we pioneered the first desktop computer-aided design system. And this was the 1972, 73, and by with Wang, we became their largest technical vendor of software, you know. And then in 1978, they started moving more towards software automation. Remember, they became very powerful in word processing. And by then, Hewlett Packard was knocking on our door and saying, can you put this same software up on this programmable unit we have called an HP 9845. Nice little unit. It had a little printer on top, and it really was a nice unit. So we said we'd do that. So by 1978, we started transitioning most of our business to Hewlett Packard.
So what was the name of your company?
Well, at that time, it was the Holguin Corporation, you know, that didn't become Accugraph until later. But at the time that we went from Holguin Associates to Holguin Corporation, and because we were dealing with larger firms, and they don't want to deal with a small little, you know, firm in El Paso, you know, so we had to pretend we're much larger than we really were.
And how many employees did you grow?
We probably had, at the time we were, probably 1978, we probably had 12 employees. I would do all the sales, I would travel, and eventually someone else joined me in traveling and doing the sales, because we just looped to every major city, but we'd go to the Wang offices. So we didn't have to open up offices. We didn't have to buy equipment because we used the equipment that was there. The salesmen got used to us coming, so they would bring in the customers to come in and see what we were doing. Hewlett Packard did the same thing. You know, I said that works best because we don't have to. You can count on us coming every 90 days, whether it's New York or Chicago or Boston, and so on. And you bring the customers in, we'll showcase, and then follow up and basically install the system.
And you became a close friend of Mr. Wang too, right?
Well, he was just a delightful person. You know, he early on in our relationship, one of his people. Okay, we're moving from the desktop, that programmable unit, 720, I remember the name, and he was releasing a product called the Wang 2200, which became the real core for word processing. It had, went from 16K to 64K, all the memory in the world at that time. And he sent me a prototype of it, but it was cardboard. He said, this is what it's going to look like. So I created a mock-up of software, a cartridge, in cardboard, and sent it to him. Here's your first software package. He loved it. So we became very good friends. He brought me up one time, and he had a big office. There was a door, and you open it, and there's a laboratory. So he would just step in and do the research right there with his people. And he said, I want to show you something. So I go in, and there's this huge flatbed plotter, the size of a drafting table. And he asked me to look at it and see what I thought. And I saw it, and I said, you've got to double the speed on it, because right now it takes 16 hours for you to do one drawing, And if you double the speed, you can get a drawing out in 8 hours. It takes a draftsman 2 days to do that same drawing. So that was just a simple productivity gain of 2 times. So he went in the room, he comes back within the hour, and he's got it working at 2.5 times the speed.
Really?
Wow. So he was a genius. So he invented the core memory that he patented, and IBM got started in the mainframe business with that core memory. But there was a time you really test people sometimes. There was a person that worked with us, was traveling the country with us, not knowing that for the 2200, he actually took our design and created the software, our software for that machine, And I found out about it, and I called Dr. Wang, and I said, I need to see you. And so I show up, and he had his attorney there, and he had the vice president of sales there, okay? And before that, so I need to go down and actually work with this product because and I'd like to work with it before I go up to see you. So I worked with it, and it was our design. I didn't have to look at the manuals. It was our design, and it's the only way to do it. The only way to make that machine work is to make it very modular. So I went up and put the manuals on the table, and I said I didn't have to look at these, Dr. Wang, because it's our design. And the vice president of sales immediately stepped in and said, "Oh no, we did this on our own," and blah blah blah. The attorney, of course, attorneys, he was gonna. There's no way, and where, that he was going to allow this to go on. So Dr. Wang looked at me, and if he had said no, we would have been out of business. We would have been out of business.
Wow.
He said, "Heck, Mr. Holguin, we'll go ahead and give you everything that we have on this product. All the revenue we've made to date, we'll go ahead and give it to you, and it's your product." So that was Dr. Wang. Okay.
Wow.
Okay. So in probably a month later, we got $50,000 check in the mail. I never had that much money at once. We didn't know what to do with it. So what do? We buy a building. We put a deposit down on a building on. You remember Cincinnati and Stanton? There's a nice little colonial building there. We bought that building to expand our business. Wouldn't have been able to do it if it hadn't been for Dr. Wang. So yes, I maintained, I'd go see him even when we moved over to Hewlett Packard. In fact, he wanted us to be the distributor. We were the distributor in El Paso for selling the Wang laptops and the office equipment and word processing. And he called me up one day, he wanted me to be his distributor for all of Mexico, And that was very tempting, but once you go to Mexico and it's a different way of doing things, and I just didn't, I wasn't ready to do that. So, but that shows you the relationship that we had to the day he died.
Wow. So now you moved over to the Hewlett Packard,
Right.
And that takes more programming, more robust programs, bigger markets.
Well, of course, Hewlett Packard was a global company, and remember, we learned early on that let us just loop around, give us total access to your offices, and we'll slot. They'll know when we're coming, and if we need, we'll call people and get them to show up. So basically, we slot ourselves into. I was hitting 3 major cities a week. Okay,
Wow.
2 to 3. Looping around. Then I'd come home and with the family, and someone else would take the loop. So that's what we did for over years. So we were able to very quickly touch the market and became the largest technical vendor of software again.
So what was your product?
Well, at that time we moved more towards computer-aided design. Okay, so we still had the civil engineering product for land development and any kind of road work, major highways and so on. That was very much online. But we branched out and started getting into computer-aided design. So remember, this was 10 years before AutoCAD. This was 10 years before.
So you were the first computer-aided drafting design program. You developed that.
Yeah, we were the first desktop computer-aided design system, 10 years ahead of the PC and with Microsoft. So we were doing this in, well, not 10 years, because we're probably really doing the full-fledged computer-aided design on a desktop in the 1979, 1980 time period. But then we moved to an HP 1000, which was a very complicated machine, In fact, the developers said, we tell them, can't you make this thing user-friendly? We may make it cordial, but we'll never make it user-friendly, okay? Which means that it was very difficult to work with. Now remember, we're talking about selling to first-time computer users. So that's what I mean by making it user-friendly. So we had to hide the complexity and create a system that was very, very easy to use. And that allowed us to branch out. Now, again, because Hewlett Packard had a worldwide organization, within the first year we had distributors in 12 countries.
Wow.
Okay. And I had 2 people traveling, again, looping around the countries making sales, because again, we couldn't justify opening up offices because people weren't paying big dollars for software. This was a brand new industry. So I think we were charging like $3,500 per copy of our software. And we didn't get anything for the hardware at that time. So within the first 2 years, we had distributors in 30 countries. So we had a global presence within the first, from I'd say by I'm talking about 1980, 1983, before the AutoCAD, before the CAD PC product really came online.
So you had a worldwide market out of El Paso.
Yeah, everything was done out of El Paso. All our people were from El Paso. We never had to recruit people from the outside. Remember, bring in young people and assign them projects, wonderful engineering graduates to this day. And we never had any turnover, you know.
Wow. So
it was
local talent.
Local talent.
So Holguin Corporation grew to what size, and then how did you have to manage that?
We never could get support from the local banks. I mean, you know that story. I mean, that as you go from being a Mexican to a Mexican American to a Chicano to a Latino and then the Hispanic, but there's no bank financing, so you had to build a business strictly on your own ability to generate revenue. Now, fortunately, I was able to get a $2 million operating line from Hewlett Packard. They had never done that before. So I was able to use that line to grow the business. Well, at most, I probably used $500,000 of that line, but I had it. You know, you had the conduit to finance and grow your business. I never had that before. So we were able to really leverage that relationship. Then we reached a point where I knew, well, the PC came on the marketplace, and I knew that we had to change to either we tried a PC product, but I just wasn't satisfied with the performance. You know, it was terrible, but you couldn't stop it from the market. So we went ahead and moved to a Unix workstation, which is the most powerful workstation that day. And to this day, many systems are based on on Unix, Linux, and so on. So we went ahead and decided that I needed to bring in some capital to move over to Unix. And I talked to some venture capitalists. One came to El Paso, but I never got a good feeling. I mean, the venture capitalists, they've got a place, but in my world, they want a lot for what they give you. And then once you spend the money, you're stuck with the venture capitalist. And so I called an individual in Ottawa, Canada, that had been our distributor for all of Canada. His name was Rod Bryden, Bryden, one of the brightest people you could ever meet. And when he was our distributor, which was System House, a company called System House, he had 300 people. They competed with Ross Perot, in the EDS in the systems engineering business. So he had 300 people. When I contacted him 3 years later, he had 8,000 people. Wow. In 3 years, he went from 300 to 8,000 people. You said, wow, of course I don't want to do that, but just the fact that he did that. Well, so when I called him, I said, here's what I'm thinking about. And he said, well, let me come down and see you. So he flew down, spent a day with us. He said, Hector, I don't want you with me. I want to walk around by myself. So he walked around by himself, talked to people, and then when he finished, he said, okay, I want to fly you up I'll send a plane down for you, fly you up to Ottawa and Toronto where you can see our operation. And there's a company called Accugraph. We have several companies. One is Paperboard Industries, which is very large, a System House, which had become on the stock market of Canada, and some other firms. GeoVision, which is a mapping system, very nice mapping system. And so he sends a Learjet to pick us up at the airport. Okay. Well, we thought that was his company plane. So Ron Munden is with me, and we pledged that we're not going to agree to anything on this trip. We're going to play hard. We're going to play hard to get. We get into the Learjet, and Ron opens the refrigerator, and there's cheese and wine and so on. And I think we both said in unison, "We've been had." So we went up and visited Toronto and Ottawa, and all we were doing was going like this. It was just a wonderful operation. He just said, I'm going to make you an offer, and it was a very nice offer. So we went ahead and merged. So Holguin Corporation became Accugraph. And so we merged with Accugraph, and I became the CEO for Accugraph. But what we did is we ran all of the North American operations in Europe from El Paso, and we ran Canada and the Far East from Toronto. So I would bounce back and forth. Accugraph was a small company. They weren't really doing well. Okay, so it just allowed him to put something behind it, and we were able to go ahead and grow Accugraph. Okay, but there's you may go on. I mean, there's the key then is that we thought we had the resources, the capital, everything we needed to grow the business. Well, then the stock crash of '87 happened. Okay, remember that? Okay. Well, here's Rod Bryden had formed a company called Kinburn Technology, and he had paperboard industry. He had 7 companies underneath that. That's where the 8,000 employees were. But he had a $600 million debt to a syndicate of banks. If you're going to grow the business that quick, and you have System House, which is the treasure, the cornerstone, that kept that value up, all of a sudden the syndicate of banks get nervous and they want their money back. So we all hanged in there, but by 1990, Kinburn went bankrupt. So in 1990, our company was taken over by the Royal Bank of Canada. People never knew that. In El Paso, Accugraph was taken over by the Royal Bank of Canada, and we fought them for 2-3 years. But anyway, our board was taken over by, we had 3 people that came in and took the majority of control of our board. And I met them in Canada, and I had a choice. Either, I didn't work with them, and just, what they didn't realize, I went ahead and filed a lawsuit in the El Paso courts to see if I could just leave and not have to do anything with Royal Bank of Canada. So when I met them in Ottawa for the first time, I said, I don't really know if I want to work for you. I may just start a different company, or we'll just keep going the way we were before we did this merger. But I'm going to ask you to come to El Paso, and you can decide, get to know us. They came down, and the 3 of them entered our boardroom. I let them know we had filed a lawsuit. Okay, just let them know that this is serious, and the only way we're going to go forward is to get your support 100%, because we can't do it otherwise. So they fortunately they agreed to support us, and they hanged in there with us while we were negotiating all this time with the Royal Bank of Canada. And that was a very fair, remember, it took over 2 years to get that resolved. Okay.
Mr. Holguin, this story is fascinating, and there's more to it. We're fortunate to be having a discussion with an engineer who built a company in El Paso called Accugraph, Mr. Hector Holguin. Thank you, Mr. Holguin.
Thank you.
Appreciate your story. We've been talking about the time that Accugraph now was taken over by a Canadian bank because of the stock market crash in '87, you said?
Right. Well, and it was 1990, but it was 1990.
So you're in a situation where you're owned, your stock is owned by the bank. So how did you resolve these conflicts?
Okay. Well, fortunately, Hewlett Packard kept our $2 million credit line. In fact, they came in knowing that we'd been taken over, and I know they were coming in to eliminate our credit line. When they walked in the room, I said, "I'm glad to see you because I want you to expand our credit line, because we can continue to grow the business." They just smiled, walked away, and came back, 2 weeks later and said, "No, we're going to keep the operating line in place." Very important. If they'd taken the operating line, we'd be history. Then the only way to negotiate with the bank was to raise the money and take them out. And the only way to do that is to let's go and get a major sell warrants and position ourselves to go on NASDAQ. So we went to New York, made several trips, and we were always at the tertiary tier. We weren't at the Bear Stearns, and so we thought that wasn't going to work. We wound up with a firm out of Toronto that was a top tier company, and they're the ones that put the package together. In 3 weeks, I'd go up to Toronto every week. They brought in some of their top investors. We raised $14 million in 3 weeks. Okay.
Wow.
Okay. Now it's Scott Hulse, not Scott Hulse. It's let me think of the name of the company. But anyway, they helped us. We took the bank out. We had $3 million in the bank. Okay, that was a lot of money to have in the bank for us at that particular point in time. So we went ahead and positioned ourselves to go on NASDAQ. 3 years later, we were on NASDAQ. We had $8 million in the bank, and we had a 55 times multiplier that we give to people that invested in the warrants. Okay, so that's the thrust of getting on NASDAQ successfully. But we as owners and workers cannot take, we can't take the money out. You got to do it through stock options. You got to do it through a plan. So it's not an easy way to enrich yourself. But certainly we made a lot of people wealthy because we were able to do that. That was, I'm talking about '93. 2 years later, I knew I was going to retire. I said, the company is doing very well. There's $8 million in the bank. We're doing very well in our markets. So in my 25th year, I decided to leave, not knowing that remember, it's a company on NASDAQ. We have a board. The person came in as CEO, decided to move the company to Dallas, and which was a mistake. And I got so upset I sold all my stock, because I just, I was angry that he didn't see the value of the company was the people in El Paso. So he dismantled that, and so he goes to Dallas. It's not working. So the only way he can keep the value, remember, we've got 10,000 customers in 30 countries, governments, military, schools, because of the work with Hewlett Packard and IBM and others. And so the only way he could, keep the value is the customer base. He went through a couple of mergers, and finally he sold the whole thing to Nortel Networks for $395 million. Okay. El Paso lost a $395 million company. Okay. So, why? You have people now like Western Refinery, that there's a wealth creation that has to stay here and make a difference. Paul Foster is making a difference. Woody Hunt is making a difference. The great wealth in the community has to stake a future, and that's what's happening. We lost a $395 million business.
But you made a difference in El Paso, though, and you've been involved. You were involved with the chamber.
Well, if my goal was just to build a large company, it could have been much bigger, but there's also demands for you from a civic standpoint. Remember, we're going through a period there where there was no Hispanic chamber, right? We started, as you well know, Hispanic Leadership Institute. So, 24 of us got together and we would talk about what we can do. Never talked about forming a Hispanic chamber. That was unthought of. We know that the community college would never have come here. We know that I heard that people in position kept the community college from being formed because they're afraid of the masses being educated. Okay, that's the reality. Okay, and so we were dealing with no real power base other than our ability to. Never been a Hispanic president of the chamber in its 100-year history until Arnold Peinado became the first one. I was the first president of the Rotary Club, a Hispanic of the El Paso Rotary Club, first one in its history. So you see what I'm saying? There's ground that's being broken there, but within that there's problems that can erupt that you have to be very careful with. I've talked about this to you before, and you were involved. That Maestro Chavez was our symphony conductor for, over 2 decades, and had been first concert master and so on and so on. He left to teach in Denver, came back and become the maestro or the conductor. And there came a time where there was people wanting to get rid of him, but unfortunately they wanted to do it improperly. Okay, just cut him off, no pension, nothing for the 40 years that he invested in the symphony. And we said it wasn't right, so we started working behind the scenes to do what we can to correct it. Well, it became a major conflict, and that's when you have to test relationships. And I remember that Alicia Chacon and I walked into Mayor Rogers, Jonathan Rogers' office, and we said, we'd like for you to appoint us as heads of a committee to help resolve this situation, between the symphony board and the maestro. And at that time, there was the maestro and the orchestra had split from the board. They were rehearsing on their own and not paying attention to the board. In other words, the symphony orchestra rallied around to protect the maestro. Okay, so here we were trying to deal with that division. There came a time when I'm talking about probably 4 or 6 hard months. That we had to dedicate to.
I was on the symphony board at that time with your wife, and it was a tough. And Maestro Chavez had been my teacher because I had gone to conservatory. I was a musician because he had influenced me so much. But it was your influence and your persistence and you dedicating your effort to that he was protected. They did finally give him some kind of a severance.
Right. But it was interesting because I told you that in a break that if I pray, I like to pray at night, like 2 or 3 in the morning, where I just, in the quiet of the evening, I can relax and let God come into my spirit. And I never bother him too much. Before I never used to pray that much because I figured that, he's got more things to worry about than an engineer in El Paso, Texas. But I learned, especially lately, that do not be, talk to God, and let him know your problem, and let him resolve your problem. And it's a strength, a spiritual strength there, the unequal, that's very important. Well, one night I prayed, I knew that it was done. The next day I knew there was going to be a major eruption within. The only way to get this thing resolved is to just throw an atom bomb at it, And I just prayed on it. I said, that's just not the way to do it. And the very next morning, I get a call from Hal Doherty of the bank, president of, I guess it's the M Bank at the time. He said, there's a group of us that want to meet with you. And so I go down to one of the bank buildings, and I walk in his room, and it's filled with 20 people, all the bank presidents and leaders of the community. Not a single brown face in the group. Okay, I'm talking about, remember, no Hispanic chamber. And so I knew many of them for years because I served in the Rotary Club and the chamber and so on. So they asked me, what's the problem and who's heading up the problem? So I mentioned the name of one individual that was the leader there. Immediately when I'm asked, who does he bank with? He banks with me. Take care of it. Just like that.
Wow.
That very same day, they lost the leadership that was the main force against the maestro. It still took time to resolve it, but then someone came up to me afterwards and said, Hector, do you realize what happened here? And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, they don't want a major eruption that they have no control over because this community, is really united behind the maestro, and this could be a tremendous problem. And that was about the time the Hispanic Chamber started coming on board, and the Greater Chamber started talking about inclusiveness, remember? And so all these
well,
these
you were
things were
instrumental.
happening.
You were instrumental in helping. I came on board in '85 to build a minority business council in the Greater Chamber. You were involved in the chamber. You were the leadership, and it was your voice always that carried a lot of weight. And we built that minority business council until 1991, and then I was acting director of the chamber. And after that year, I left, and that group went and formed the Hispanic Chamber in 91 and 92. But your influence was always strong and always important. So here's a local inventor, entrepreneur, builds a very strong company that has international clients, governments, like you say, schools, hospitals all across. Your software was the engineering software used by nations. Developed here in El Paso, developed by El Paso talent. You have some position here in El Paso as a Hispanic leader at that time. And in 1995, you step away from your company. How many employees did you have at that time at Credit?
Well, we probably had certainly over 100 in El Paso. But remember, we reached, we had distributors in 30 countries. So if you look at the workforce that was required to sell, support, and so on, it was it was certainly in the hundreds and hundreds, worldwide. But one thing I'd forgotten, but we started the software industry in China. We started the software industry in China. That's and
when you say we, you mean?
Well, with Hewlett Packard. And let me. During the Cold War, I don't know why I just thought. During the Cold War, Hewlett Packard kept an office in China and one in Moscow during all that time, knowing that when they got back in, they'd be there. So when the Cold War ended, immediately we were asked, "Can you receive a delegation from China?" Because part of them will come to El Paso, learn software, and the other part will go to Palo Alto to learn about the actual systems and the computers. So we received, the first delegation we received was from Beijing, very sophisticated, and a woman was one of the leaders. And we had a wonderful dialogue, but then they said, okay, we're going to send a group to be trained on CAD, and they came more from, not from the city, they came from the rural area. They arrived with an interpreter, okay, about 6 young men, and so I greet them, wait for the interpreter to say something. Well, the interpreter was terrible, so he couldn't serve the job of being an interpreter. So here we are, we have to train them, and so we looked for someone at Fort Bliss. Does anyone speak Chinese? And we didn't have any luck. Finally, the 2 people that handled our training said, let us work with them, because it's computer-aided design, we can show them, and with the drills maybe they'll learn. The very second day I heard chattering and laughing. They were in that room strictly communicating with what was happening on the screen. They never learned English. When they left, we were toasting each other. They toast us in Chinese, and we toast them in Spanish and English, and it was a beautiful camaraderie. The same thing happened with a delegation from Moscow. The head of public works came, and they were allowed to use the older computer, which at that time was an HP 1000. They weren't allowed to get the latest computers from the from the U.S. So again, we were able to work with the first level of all the apartments and all the public works of Moscow. From that time on, we're done with our software. So
wow.
that to me is just. But to me, the most wonderful experience of all, which takes the humanity, is that we had a professor in Washington State, and he said, Hector, I want to teach drafting to people that can't, have no body movement from the neck down. I think there's voice. Through voice, maybe they can learn to use your CAD system. And he said, I went ahead and tried it because I went ahead and put myself in a harness, and the only way I could get to the computer was by bending over and with a tongue peck on the keyboard, just because that's the only movement he had. So he said, I think if you work with me, I think we can go ahead and start a course for people that have, that are totally disabled from physically. And I talked to Hewlett Packard, and we put together a package for him, and he started teaching, the people that had absolutely no movement from the neck down to be expert drafters. So wow. It was simple voice commands and simple, that to me is the greatest example of the human spirit.
Wow.
And so so it's not just the young people. We had a 70-year young lady that they called me from an engineering firm in Houston and said, we've got a lady that's been with us. She's 70 years young, and she wants to learn the computer, and we don't want to embarrass her, so will you accept her in El Paso and keep her as long as you want? 70 years young, she comes. We had her back in 2 weeks, and she continued to drive for him until she was 75.
Wow.
So she was young at spirit. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Remember, you're talking about people that are afraid of computers, they're afraid of programming, and so that's what I mean about breaking the status quo.
Wow. Yeah. Well, here you are. You're out of Accugraph now. You take a break, and you start another venture. Can you tell us a little bit about your...
Well, when I retired in '95, I didn't think I was going to come. We moved to Santa Fe. My wife's very much into the arts. It was a way to, refurbish the spirit and stay away from the temptation of getting back into the technical world. And we really had a wonderful time for, 4, 5 years. Then I saw what was being done with the dot-com era. Hundreds of millions of dollars were being thrown at startup companies. And I said, well, El Paso should do something. So I started, tinkering with something. And it wasn't until then, all of a sudden, you have the 2000, the major terrorist act, September of 2001, right? And I was approached by P.T. Wright, who heads up at that time was head of the headquarters for U.S. Customs and Border Protection here in El Paso. He said, I'd like to protect I know about your reputation with technology. Is there some way to protect the commerce that goes back and forth from some kind of a sabotage or terrorist act? So we started looking at that, and we put together some demonstrations. And let's fast forward, because it was in 2006 we really were able to put something robust together and ran demonstration projects. We had delegations from Washington, D.C., and we had great support. So I applied for funding from the Emerging Technology Fund of Texas, which is in place today. I mean, I just found out that Eli Velasquez, we Innovate El Paso, people interested, he's certainly available to talk to you about, starting a company. And in the same building, you got the hub, which is also based to, help people. So we applied, but it was a tough process, Without getting into discrimination, we recognize that we're in El Paso. Most of the grants are being given in Austin, Houston, Dallas, and so on. So we're the first one, and one of the largest. We got $2 million. We got funded in 2007, but it took us probably 6 to 9 months to break through and stick with it to where we insisted on certain parameters, and we got it. So today, the state of Texas owns 10% of our company.
What is this company's name?
Secure Origins Incorporated. So in 2007, we got the grant, but as part of the condition, we got a valuation of $20 million. Well, this is based on the value of the technology in the marketplace. We have no revenue. This is strictly based on the evaluation, which means that $2 million came in, and they got warrants, which can become stock. So they got in a premium, so they actually have 11% ownership in warrants in Secure Origins today. But we were able to take that money and invest it, and we have an operational center now in El Paso that serves the entire border, both sides, a 1,900-mile border. And so our job now is to bring this product to where we can, in fact, right now the wait times on the bridges for commercial trucks and passenger trucks is unbelievable. It's over 2 hours at Bridge of the Americas, Cordova, and so what we're doing is creating a process with the cooperation of CBP, which is Customs and Border Protection, with the cooperation of Aduana Mexico, where we take trusted shipments and allow them to cross the bridge in minutes and eliminate the wait times. So basically, it transforms the way of doing business, because right now, the wait times are, you can't predict anything.
So you've developed a technical product.
It's still, it's software driven, but we tie into, we can see web cameras at the shipping dock in Juarez. We can see them from El Paso. We can see the trailer being secured, being loaded, being sealed. We can then watch through GPS. We can watch the movement of each truck to the approach lane. Because it's trusted and we're following, they eliminate the wait time. They go right to the entrance to Aduana Mexico. The goal there is to go across Aduana Mexico in 15 minutes instead of an hour and a half. The goal is to cross CBP, which is U.S. Customs and Border Protection, in 15 minutes and not an hour and a half. So you cut the potential for 3 hours or more of wait times, you cut them down to be able to cross in 30 minutes. That transforms the way that trade is moving. As it is, we have $80 billion of trade. The Juarez El Paso trade is $80 billion. And we have it all blocked up. So if we free that for the trusted trade, have a major impact in the billions of dollars, much, much larger than the impact of Fort Bliss on our economy. Just to show you that the U.S.-Mexico trade has grown from 300 billion in 2009 to 390 billion in 2010 to 460 billion in 2011, and it'll be over $500 billion this year. That's unbelievable growth. And we're sitting here talking about immigration reform and talking about our nation would have a major setback, especially Texas, if something happened to the maquila industry and the employment that's there. Texas annual trade with Mexico is the largest of all the states. It's probably approaching 200 billion, a year.
Wow. So you've now channeled your energies to develop a product that helps commerce in El Paso in a big way. And what's your role with that now?
Well, I can't. Well, it is public information. We did have a shareholders meeting, and what is this going to be? Because I'd rather wait until it's actually publicly announced. But there are some big changes, which is good for what we're doing, that allow us to grow it at a much larger scale. I think if the core model has to be El Paso Juarez. Okay, we have the largest maquila plants on the border here. We have the automotive industry. The electronic industry is huge in El Paso. So our job is to create the model border that we can replicate. But from here, we maintain the control here and manage it from here, but then go to San Diego and do the same thing in Otay Mesa and San Isidro. Go to Nogales, go to Laredo. Do you see what I'm saying? It's very important that this model, which I believe we can deliver more cost effectively than anyone else, because it is modular. Everybody gets the same flavor. Everybody has the same problem. So if we can improve the logistics, the supply chains, this whole, and I think that Secure Origins has a very solid future. I've committed to be there 2 more years. Okay, and without telling you what's going to happen, I think the important thing is that we have the talent in place and the management in place to take it to the next level.
So you developed another international business out of El Paso. So was this part of your dream to develop these kinds of products, inventions, and as you were growing up, was that a dream of yours?
I don't think. Sometimes you do have to form a vision of what you can do and deliver the vision. But I think I can always tell you that's not the way it happens. Life is tough. Being an entrepreneur is it's risk. You're taking huge risks. The greater the risk, the greater the innovation has to be. But it still consumes you every day. And you have to have a very understanding family. And thank God for Rosario. But I hope I can always be creative. I'm not going to start another company, not this year anyway. I'm not going to do that, But I think that learning that if you do your very best and you keep, changing and adding, that it just happens. It's some of the captains for industry. They plan it all and they're able to use people and they become captains of industry, but I don't want to become like some of them. That to me, it's understanding that it's people that make it work, especially in our community. We're sort of locked in. We don't know how good we are, and I think we're beginning to sort of test how good we are. There's things happening that hadn't happened before. Our chambers are vibrant. Fort Bliss hopefully will stay vibrant. Our trade is good. We got good, solid. I love our mayor, John Cook. The council is strong, and so I think our mayor is going to be playing a very important role on the border. Okay, I don't mind. You need to find out what he's going to be doing. But he's going to be doing some wonderful things when he leaves office.
Well, Hector, your story is certainly an important one in our community. not only because of what you've done for El Paso, but I think that the story also shows that you can build a world-class company, in fact, 2 world-class companies from El Paso, using El Paso talent. Just facing the challenges as you have and as you've shared is just phenomenal. I just totally appreciate, you know, your sharing with us your story, and just a final sentence. What parting sentence would you leave us with to encourage people who want to?
Well, I've learned early on that, again, you know, don't remember, the fear is there, understand it's there, but leave it against the wall where it can't hurt you. Coasting is downhill, you know. You can't, the status quo is coasting, you know. There's always something, especially now, everything's changing rapidly. And I'd say you need to stay at the lead of what's going on. And I see young children playing with things that were thought unimaginable, you know. I mean, I got a little toy that my granddaughter plays with, 3 years old, that has more power in it than the Saturn mission, you know. It's unbelievable, you know. So I think we have a wonderful future of innovation and technology and entrepreneurship. You know, that's what separates our country from any other country in the world. And I think that'll continue.
Wow. Well, certainly a fascinating story. And you certainly are an entrepreneur, a serial entrepreneur, and an innovator. And it's certainly been a thrill, and I really thank you for your time. And I trust the viewers have really enjoyed this show. Thank you very much for watching. Good day.